Hi, it's Dana Saylor. I'm bringing you my regular weekly Tuesday video about healing and creativity. Today, I wanted to address a concept that is a really important foundational one before we get too far down the road into self-care. A lot of the work that I do is to encourage people, especially women and mothers, to embrace self-care and to establish some really healthy habits and routines around self-care. The problem is that so many of us, especially women, have a history of trauma or chronic stress. And I'm going to address that today because it's very important in terms of moving forward and creating routines that are healthy and positive, but also recognizing the realities that we're working with as individuals who have stories and challenges that are in our pasts. Sometimes with chronic stress, it's ongoing. And so what am I talking about when I use these terms? When I'm talking about trauma, it can be anything from childhood abuse to neglect, to alcoholism, to domestic violence. It can be all kinds of things in a range of experiences and situations. Now, this might have been during childhood. It might have been during adulthood. Especially childhood experiences can be really the hardest to manage in terms of how you deal with it later in life. But all of these have similar effects on the nervous system and the brain and the spirit. Chronic stress, when we're talking about that, it can be everything from a really busy, stressful job to caring for aging parents in really complicated situations to raising children. All of these things can cause chronic stress. And a lot of us are doing them all at the same time. So if that sounds familiar, any of these things, then I want to really delve into this in terms of how we take care of ourselves as people who have had these experiences of various kinds, because they play out in the body in similar ways, no matter what. A really great book that I've read recently that I mentioned during a live that I did the other day is called Widening the Window. And that book talks a lot about traumatic experiences and chronic stress and how they play out in the body in similar ways. And so it's really important to understand that even if, you're like, well, I didn't have a childhood trauma, like, what's my problem? But you're experiencing daily chronic stress due to your life situation, your body doesn't understand the difference necessarily. Like, it may be a story from a very long time ago, or it can be something that's going on right now. Your body does not know the difference. So it's really important to be aware of the effects of these things on our bodies and our nervous systems. Nervous system is a big thing that people are talking about lately, and there's a good reason, because it's something that we need to address before we try to delve into a big self-care regimen, or do routines that, that work for us if we don't know as much about ourselves and our needs as we could. So it's like jumping into something. It's like saying, I'm going to take this drug, but you don't have a prescription, right? Because you don't have a doctor who's like looked at your history and is like, maybe this could be a factor that would complicate this drug for you, right? So we're thinking about the prescription of the self-care routines, but we're going to go backwards and say, but what are the underlying conditions that might make this prescription not work as well for you as it might for others? Or what might we know that would lead us to customize your prescription for your situation? Does that make sense? So it's super important, I believe, to be aware of our own histories, our own traumas, our own struggles. And if we are aware of those things and have been dealing with them in various ways, for some people it's counseling, for other people you have some sort of practice that has helped you sort of discharge the difficulties of that time. And if you're currently going through chronic stress, then you're going to need a different prescription, which is going to be also about mitigating the effects of what you're going through right now. Now, I am not a clinician. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a therapist, but I am a person who's experienced trauma. And I can just speak from my own experience personally, and that's what I'll tell you now. So as a person with a history of trauma, there are so many wonderful grounding practices that I've done in my life. And I think it's really great that right now we're in a moment when we can have access to lots of things like this. Like we can learn about yoga, we can learn about meditation, we can hear about breath work, and we can try different types. We can hear about Ayurveda, which is the ancient Indian medicine practices that my colleague Catherine Yanucci practices and teaches a lot about when we do retreats together. So there's these and many more, right? Many more things that people do to take care of themselves, basically, to heal their nervous system, to feel better, to address, daily stresses, to create movement in their bodies, to feel strong. And all these things are good, right? They're good for us. And if you're a person like me who has a background of trauma, you have to go into it a little bit differently. Because what I was doing was approaching these practices just kind of as they came up, like whack-a-mole style, right? Like, oh, yoga, I'll do some yoga, cool. And that was great, but it was just sort of like I was responding to whatever came up in front of me without necessarily thinking about the big picture, thinking about my personal needs, thinking about my history, thinking about, what might work best for me. And I was just doing them as they came up. Oh, this person is doing meditation. I'll take a meditation. Oh, this person's teaching breath work. Sure, I'll learn about that. And all of these things are really positive things, but I was approaching them really scattershot. There was no plan. There was no routine. There was no regularity. There was no consistency. It was just kind of like experimenting. And that's what we all do at first, right? You encounter encounter a program, you think, oh, I'll try this because it's what you're encountering. It's what's in front of you, right? This is normal. But I just want to tell you that if you can go into it with a little bit more of a self-awareness, then you will have much better results, okay? And the other thing too that I discovered is that I would start some routine, perhaps, every day I'm going to do a little yoga routine, and then I'll do some meditation, and I'll journal, right? These are all great things. And I would find myself slipping out of these routines. Now, we could say, oh, well, Dana, you became a parent, 6 years ago. And so, of course, it's going to be hard for you to maintain routines because you have a 6-year-old, right? So yes, I could absolutely blame it on that. But my child recently started going to school, and what I discovered was that even though I suddenly had more time to do the things I needed to do, I wasn't doing them. I wasn't doing these routines of self-care. I was avoiding them, and I knew that I was avoiding them. Now, I thought about what was going on in my life at that time, back in the summer of last year. My mother was diagnosed with a brain tumor. Lots of complicated feelings about that. And then also, my child's going to school for the first time. Lots of complicated feelings about that. And so there was a lot going on emotionally, right, in my world. And also with a history of trauma, when new big emotional things happen, you learn with training, with sort of the guidance of other people who are helping you, counselors and et cetera, that when a new big emotional thing arises, your trauma may also resurface. Okay, so it's kind of triggering a revisiting of that in lots of complicated ways. Again, I'm not a clinician, but for you, it might be different than it was for me. I suddenly realized and had a lot of clarity about the fact that I'm avoiding these practices because I feel dissociated, right? I'm very much like a brain walking around without a body. I'm a head, that's it, right? Because it feels safer to be dissociated, to be just a brain that's thinking instead of a heart that is feeling, because the feelings are too overwhelming. And even if I didn't have a history of trauma, last year was a lot, right? So it's understandable that when you have big stuff happening and the feelings are overwhelming and they feel so intense that when you begin to do your routines of self-care and then you fall apart every single time, you're a mess, or for some people, you feel very frozen. You feel paralyzed. You can't feel anything. You feel numb, right? So that might be the case for you. But for me, it was the opposite. I'm a very emotional person. My emotions are closer to the surface when I'm having a hard time. So my emotions were very close to the surface. And every time I would go to do these practices, I would fall apart. I would weep. I would cry. I would feel so like despondent, right? And, well, why did I stop doing them? Because I didn't want to feel that way anymore. And it wasn't a choice that was, I said to myself, I don't want to feel this way. I'm not going to do these practices. It just sort of was like, my brain said, we're protecting you. We're not going to feel these feelings. We're going to stop. And so then I found convenient excuses to not do the things that I was supposed to do for my well-being, and I wasn't doing them. Result for me was I became very blocked and also very angry, because the feelings have to be processed. And if they can't be processed, they will come out in another way. It's like a volcano. And so I also realized this is not a tenable situation, right? I cannot keep running away from how I'm feeling and processing what's going on, but I also don't want to feel so overwhelmed. So I needed to find a way into everything that was modulated, that was a little bit more careful. Like I was going to pick my way down a path down the mountain instead of like climbing down scaling down the face of the cliff, right? Now, that process of choosing what you will do to modulate your entry into self-care practices because you're a little concerned about what your response might be is going to be different for each person. But I think that taking time away and going and getting out of your routine in some way, even for 2 days, and I know that sounds like an incredible impossibility probably for a lot of you, and it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be fancy. It could be you go to the spare room in your friend's house and you ask them to leave you the hell alone, right? Getting yourself away and getting perspective is essential when this is happening. You got to get out of your routines. You got to get out of your comfort zones, and you can't be like distracted with all the daily things you must do because you cannot listen to your heart in those situations. Okay, so like find a way to go listen to your heart. Write down everything that it's telling you. Listen to music, dance, go for long walks, draw things, sculpt things, lay on the bed and stare at the ceiling, like whatever it takes for you to try to come to an understanding of how you can enter into these things in a way that feels safe and what is really happening, what is really going on. And also in those times, a way you may begin to process kind of automatically because you're away from all the things you have to do. And all of a sudden you're faced with yourself. That can feel hard, but it's also the only way out is through, right? Now, again, I'm not a clinician, and I encourage anyone who has a history of trauma or is dealing with some chronic stress right now to work with someone, please. Especially, and I want to say this, if you are feeling like life is not worth living, you want to end it all and the world would be better off without you or anything like that, that's suicidal ideation. That's, something that I really want you to call a local hotline and speak to somebody who can help you right away. Okay, so if that's something that you're going through, that's a crisis, and you want to call somebody who's going to help you right away. If you're not in crisis, but you're really struggling with big emotions or feeling triggered by events that are happening and you are struggling to deal with it, then I really encourage you to call up a counselor and get on their schedule. You can do it virtually nowadays. You can do it in person. Because you need guidance. Sometimes your own guidance is enough, but if you're still feeling like you're foundering and you're struggling and like your own company and time away isn't really like resolving this issue for you, then you need an uninvolved third party who can help assess the situation from a clinical standpoint. Whether you want to do, there's a whole bunch of different styles of counseling, therapy. There's psychologists, psychiatrists, licensed clinical social workers. There's people who have a more pragmatic approach. There's people who have a more spiritual approach. you have to start taking steps to find someone who's going to help you understand what's going on for you in your particular situation. Okay. And if you feel like you've got that decently in hand and you really do just need to clear away the time so that you can sit with yourself and really ask yourself these questions, then I want you to encourage you to go and book that time, however and wherever it is, because this is about your internal well-being, which affects everyone else around you, right? I could use trite, phrases that everybody says about mamas not being happy, but if you are not well, then you cannot be well to those around you, right? And you will be depleted and discouraged, and your energy will get lower and lower. You'll be more likely to get sick. This is about not just taking care of yourself, but taking care of your family and taking care of your community. You need to be well for you, primarily, and then secondarily for the other people who rely on you, okay? And so I don't want to say that being well is a duty, but is a duty to yourself, right? And so making yourself your number one project for this reason is super important, and I want to encourage you to do it. And I'll talk to you more next Tuesday with more healing thoughts, okay? Thanks, everyone, for joining me.